going up. Elevator systems. Bowen family systems theory in brief for a life of learning. Welcome to Elevator Systems, the podcast that presents ideas from Bowen family systems theory in brief and hopefully some useful ways. Today is the first in a two-part look at the idea of differentiation of self. My name is Dixie Vandersloos. I'm a counselor and a new faculty member of Living Systems. Katie White is here as always, and Katie is a marriage and family therapist and the executive director of Living Systems in Vancouver. Great to have you here, Katie.
Thanks. Happy to be here.
The guest brave enough, I'll use the word brave enough to tackle an elevator pitch on differentiation of self is Amie Post. And Amie lives in Baltimore, Maryland, where she's a marriage and family therapist and has a practice coaching, consulting, and educating based on Bowen theory. She was recently named as the Interim CEO president of the Center for Family Systems Theory of Western New York, and previously was the executive director at the Family Crisis Center of Baltimore County. She began studying Bowen theory in 2001 and is a member of the board of directors and on the faculty of the Bowen Center in Washington. And she's also a wife and a mom of 3 adult children and a grandmother. So welcome, Amie.
Thanks. It's good to be here. I'm not sure if it's brave or foolish. We'll see.
We will see. Seems brave to me. So Dr. Bowen called differentiation of self the cornerstone of the theory. So Amie, would you like to tackle this concept in 30 seconds or less?
I think it's important to think about differentiation not being a finite concept, but in true systems fashion, it's dynamic. And the dynamism is trying to capture many dimensions. Oftentimes, differentiation of self is talked about as the intrapsychic, the things going on inside of people, and the interpersonal, the things going on between people. Differentiation of self would be the emergent phenomenon of those kind of dynamic forces and the interplay between them as it shows up in everyday life. So inside of me and between us is always at play, and it represents different levels, different efforts of differentiation to adapt to challenge.
Wow,
Great.
There we go.
You didn't even read that. That was just all in your brain. It's amazing. Yeah, Katie, go ahead.
So I took, because I know we're doing this in 2 parts, I broke it down. So this is I was inspired by other guests who have really gotten down to like a few words. So I have a short and a long version of kind of the intrapsychic portion of differentiation of self. So my quick one is acting or responding with thinking, or acting or responding before thinking. That was my quick. And then a little deeper, I said, I think of this part of differentiation of self as a underlying energy or force. I couldn't decide on which one I wanted to choose. That defines how we approach challenge or interactions with others. One way is to be guided by those automatic responses, similar to reflexes, and the other way is to have decision-making guided by thoughtful thinking. So there's my pitch for that part of it.
Good. Yeah, I did similar to you, Katie, with long and short. So the long one first for me was the first part of differentiation of self is an internal process and includes a person's ability to distinguish thoughtful thinking from automatic emotions, feelings, and reactions. This sounds simple enough, but you wouldn't believe how smart my anxious brain sounds. It has a very impressive lexicon. So the idea of one's best thinking or most thoughtful self is often used and includes being able to tease out facts from feelings, the big picture from a narrow view, short-term discomfort from long-term growth. Or my one sentence is, differentiation of self includes my ability to accurately evaluate the thoughts, feelings, and emotions I experience. And then,
Can I just push a little bit here?
Yes, please.
I was thinking differentiation of self is also kind of capturing that evolutionary nature of all of life that humans represent. So it's a little bit deeper for me than just thinking and feeling. It's
Yeah.
this emotional system, that kind of instinctual, automatic way we
Right.
have. And then our intellectual system, which is a bit more capacity to broaden the data set that comes in. And then, as you're both saying, evaluate between threat and necessary automatic instinctual reaction and response, which has itself in service to kind of values, characteristics, principles, and goals.
Mhm.
It's a little bit richer, I think, when
Yeah.
you think about it as systems that have evolved to survive life. And they're just tools. The interplay of those tools
Hmm.
broadens what we can accomplish.
Yeah.
I was stuck. I thought, I was writing down things about kind of the older system of versus kind of the newer, more developed system of the cognitive system of the human, and could not put it together with good words. But I think evolution and how the human has developed is an important piece in this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that our
With
brains are kind of a product of their natural system, right?
Yeah.
They're designed to be responding all the time to basic efforts to survive and reproduce.
would the phrase instinct kind of fit in there, or?
Yeah. I think Bowen did a nice job of linking the emotional system to the instinctual system. We sometimes label it
Yeah.
feelings, but the feelings are really kind of that bridge to capture the things that are stirred at the instinct level. And like we label them, name them, contain them ish by labeling them.
Yeah.
I was
Yeah.
glad you brought up the feelings. I said that it had to be a part of this discussion, is how we talk about feelings versus emotion, which is very different in Bowen theory than some other places.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think we'll do a whole episode on that distinction, because it's clearly important, and more, like you say, more than just feelings. A quote from Dr. Bowen: differentiation of self has to do with the way the human handles the intermix between emotional and intellectual functioning. At the highest level are those with most differentiation between emotional and intellectual functioning. They are more free to live their lives to the fullest, or they have the capacity to make decisions based on intellect and reasoning when confronted with reality issues. People at lower levels have emotion and intellect so fused that intellectual functioning is submerged in emotionality, that their lives are dictated by emotionality. They may be able to think about issues outside themselves, or think about themselves when anxiety is low, but under stress, their thinking is replaced by automatic emotional reactiveness. And then from Dr. Kerr in Family Evaluation, I think this says it really nicely: increasing one's ability to distinguish between thinking and feeling within self and others, and learning to use that ability to direct one's life and solve problems, is the central guiding principle of family psychotherapy. So there we go. Lots of places to go.
That Bowen quote, I think, is particularly useful to me on the regular. It is not, in my opinion, it's not suggesting that higher levels of functioning are trade-offs between an intellectual system and an emotional system, but it's a more complex partnership between the resource that both systems bring to the table. I think Kerr's comment for me is a way of thinking about bringing both of those systems online. And I like the idea. For me, it was really important to begin to learn the difference between what is a reaction from the emotional system and what was an intellectually system-driven effort. I didn't even know that in myself. And so a primary question was to ask, is this a think or is this a feel? And then I could start to sort out, how did I want to make a decision? Did I want to make it based on how I felt right now? Well, that's very fungible. It's mercurial. It is always moving. I feel good one minute and bad the next.
Right.
If I'm making decisions based on that, holy cow, it'd be all over the place. But when I put some of my decisions in service to like longer term goals, core values, things that I find to be absolutely non-compromisingly important, my decision making process for myself and how I relate to others changes pretty dramatically.
Yeah. That just pumped up for me. I'm moving right along, Dixie. Sorry, but an example of thinking of client work around people and dating and mate selection, and how, that there can be that feeling that's driven in the moment. And I, try and get curious with clients about how that can differ, and based on the day, based on, the moment, based on the environment, versus thinking about what would it be like to be thoughtful about what you are, how you show up in a date, how you want to be there, what the person sitting on the other side of you, triggers, for lack of a better word, kind of in you, how you interact in it. And I think that example came to me because I think I do a lot of that talking, that just responding to the feeling of the moment. And dating is such a one that's constantly people are responding that they felt this way or that way.
Yeah, I was working with someone the other day who was trying to decide whether or not they would stay in their workspace or seek a new employer, or just quit altogether. And I was trying to get curious, like, what's going on for you? And the person was really clear. I hate it. And I was like, what about it do you hate? Is it the hours? No. Schedule's great. Is it the pay? I mean, I could always use more money, but it's not the pay. It's just, I feel like everybody's judging me all the time. That's a pretty powerful feeling, emotional reaction that would drive a major change in this person's life. And so the way I was kind of working with them to get curious about what would happen if the intellectual system could work alongside this feeling system. So it wasn't getting rid of the feelings, wasn't processing them to get them out in the open and then you could just deal with it. It was, how do you make your intellectual system more available as a partner? And so I asked a question like, if these feelings were going on, how would you want to take a different kind of responsibility for how you responded to them? What would the more ideal work situation look like? What would be the more ideal way for you to navigate you in any workspace? And from there, the person could just start to generate checklists, essentially, for themselves and for the environment that would help them make a different decision than just, it feels crappy.
Right.
I'm going to punch up. I like the word that you said there about the partnership, because I think sometimes the takeaway people get in Bowen theory, both in this area of differentiation of self and specifically, especially the next one, I think the togetherness, individuality, that it's an either or. And I really appreciated the word around partnership. Like, how do you use these together to provide you information about how you want to be in the world?
Yeah. I mean, that emotional system is a fundamental superpower that has allowed the geranium sitting here on my desk to survive.
Yeah.
It's an automatic response. It's necessary for us. So we don't really want to get rid of that.
No.
But we have this wonderful gift of an intellectual system and then this capacity to allow these two to work together. That's differentiation.
Yeah.
Well, my example, because I decided to watch the new movie Inside Out 2 again last night in preparation for this, with this sort of in mind. And I was thinking about the internal process that the movie highlights of these different emotions, these different colored characters, and which one is accurate or appropriate for the moment. Like you said, Amie, that it can fluctuate so much in terms of our response, what we think is the right thing to do, whether anger is in the driver's seat or disgust or joy or that kind of thing. And my suggestion for Pixar is Inside Out 3, when Riley, the main character, who in this movie is 13, when she's 25 and she has a more developed prefrontal cortex. What does it look like when this capacity to sort of see the bigger picture is more developed? And there's so much more to it than that, because there's the relationship and everything, but just these internal processes and sort of the tug of war between the intellect and emotion.
Yeah, and I think we know from, you can think back to our earliest memories. My 3-year-old grandson, they're having a biting fest in the classroom these days. We get a note home on Monday that the grandson was the biter, and on Tuesday he was the recipient. Wednesday he's the biter again. They call it a chompedemic. And the basic urge that they're all responding to is something about their well-being was threatened, and then their instinct, their emotional system was in charge. In the relationship process with teachers and other adults, and maybe even some other kids, they are developing an intellectual system that can help organize and orient that instinct to greater purpose. So my grandson has been told the aim here is it's okay to be upset and angry, but instead of using your teeth, please use your words.
Right.
And we know how much you like to use your teeth for lollipops. So when you have a good day where your teeth were used appropriately, you will be achieving your goal of having access to a lollipop. So now he's being given an external schema that he can then create in his own self that allows all those big feelings to exist, but it puts them in service to bigger goals for himself. He's still fighting a week later.
Useful. But I appreciate the
Aren't we all in
aspect.
some way or another?
Yeah, I like the developmental aspect. That was one of my examples I thought of I just spent a week with a few pre-adolescents. And so to think about that experience of when something happens and they just get so emotional and they don't know why it's happening, right? It's that flood of just overwhelming, and they can't put words to it. And they, and I just think I distinctly remember in my early 20s still having that strong emotional response, but being able to think about it and how useful it was. I mean, it doesn't happen on a regular basis for me. I can have those big emotions without being able to access some thinking. But I think that's, just thinking of it developmentally for people to get a sense of what this is. That's one of the ways that I saw it, is I could see myself thinking about it, that I had a choice to do different things, that there was some space. And I wrote, it would depend on what relationship I think I was in and how much ability I would have had to access that thinking or not. My mother could attest for that.
I love that you just lifted up there what I think the elegance of Bowen theory is that it moves this idea of internal process into the relationship system. And it asks the question, like, is this big emotional reaction I'm having something that is coming from within me? Bowen theory suggests that it's living in the relationship system and we're transmitting it. It is, we're emitting it, but it's happening in the relationship system, and it's responding to tension and upset in the system and from others. So that impulse to bite may or may not be about the jockeying that you just got from the little guy next to you. It might be that the teacher came in from lunch and is now stressed out that nobody's actually napping. So I like the elegance of the theory that this emotional system isn't just happening in the individual. It's a function of the organism, the family unit in which people are operating.
Yeah. And I think that is the unique thing about Bowen theory, is to put it in that relationship context. So, I think having people observe wider than just inside themselves, which I think you just kind of got at, Dixie, with Inside Out. I think there's a little, I watched it too. There's a little of that kind of relationship variation. But I think that's something that's, it's just, I'm going to preach here, that would be useful for all of us to do a little bit more of, is thinking about the ways we show up in different relationships.
I thought Inside Out, we've just watched the first one in preparation. But I thought it did a nice job of kind of illustrating how family emotional process organizes and orients that emotional system in the individual. So by getting those glimpses of the parents' personalities, having all that stuff going on, and seeing how in one parent, they were not oriented toward expressing certain components of their emotional system, and how the kid picks up kind of the gap in the expression. That triangle between mom, dad, and child being the basic organizing force for how the emotional system of each one of them is operating in real time.
Yeah. We get less insights into the parent's brain in the second one.
Yeah.
I hope that's not a spoiler.
But it is too bad. What else in terms of sort of the usefulness of this idea? And I appreciate Amie highlighting that you can't really, I mean, we're doing this in 2 separate episodes, but you can't really separate these 2 ideas, sort of the internal and the external aspects of differentiation. But what else is useful?
My useful is a little bit of my takeaway. Is I think the thing that I really always appreciate about getting clear on how my system functions is choice and freedom. I think that's the usefulness to me, is when I can know better how I function, which would involve all these aspects of differentiation and in the context of different relationships. I actually think that it gives me, if I slow down enough, it gives me the ability to make a choice. And I just think there's power in that. I don't know if power is the right word. I was thinking, I had an example of a client who did a lot of work about thinking about how she functioned in her family, and came back after a family visit and was talking about how she would automatically move towards her sister in a certain way, and spoke about how she actually in real time saw that happening, that automatic, that would just be her interaction. And she stopped for a minute and said, I'm still going to do this thing, but I'm thinking about my choice here. And she just talked about how it was so different of an experience for her. I got curious how it landed in the system maybe differently. But I appreciate the usefulness of it in that piece of, I can better understand me. I can make more. I have more bandwidth, more choices available to me when I do that. That's mine.
I went in a very different direction. One of the things, not everybody knows about me, I like to play pickleball. I'm not very good at it, which makes it a wonderful opportunity to keep thinking and growing. And one thing I noticed when I play with one partner, we're not very good at spreading out our gifts and talents over the whole side of our court. So we tend to be doing the same thing at the same time. And it's very, we're easy targets for our opponents because there's lots of open space that somebody can drill the ball to and get points on us. When I think about that level of differentiation where our emotional system and our intellectual system are more fused and it forces an either or kind of way of being, it's like playing pickleball with your partner and you only cover one little corner of your side of the court. And what I like about the elegance of this invitation of differentiation is that you honor the strengths, the capacities of both the systems, but then you kind of work to kind of deploy them to cover more ground. And as my partner and I have gotten less dependent on being okay by being near each other and trusting each to do our own work and cover the ground that's in front of us, we're so much better. And we're getting a little bit harder to beat, not a lot harder. But it just helps me understand that it's not getting rid of the emotional system. It's not building up some kind of intellectual system that doesn't have feelings associated with it, but it's just broadening the repertoire of my overall system and then allowing me sometimes to just react and other times to slow down and be really responsive. I don't want to lose the react part of me if a bear shows up in my office right now. I would like to have the respond part of me available if the noise I hear isn't actually a bear, but just somebody knocking on the front door.
Right.
I was smiling because I thought that's where the usefulness of the theory came in real life for me, when I thought my fan was someone breaking into my house.
Yeah.
And I wanted to be aware if someone broke into my house, but I could have that thoughtfulness. But you punched up 2 words there, Amie, which was that react and respond thing. I'm going to take over Dixie's space. Could you say more about that? React and respond?
And this is based on a lot of the good learning from Dan Papero. So I don't have the depth of understanding that he does. But as I've thought and listened to him, that emotional system being the embedded instinctual life force that kind of is really just sensitive and reacting to the environmental or adaptive challenge. It's the thing that keeps us alive.
Mm.
And it's the thing, too, I think, that orients us automatically to other. The respond part of our brain is that prefrontal cortex that has evolved more slowly in life forms, but it provides that complexity. It allows for more data. In humans, it gives us this ability to look backwards, to consider the now and imagine the future. And it also gives us this capacity to imagine what others are thinking, backwards and forwards. Most of our imagining, of course, is distorted. So the respond part of our brain pulls in more information. It has a better capacity for synthesis. It's not always action oriented. Whereas that react part of our brain is just designed to keep us alive.
Which is important.
Yeah. And I don't think we can be without it.
One thing I've used with clients is the idea of the focus and intention that it takes to be mad at the thing that you're actually mad at. Whereas when we get angry, it sort of sprays around whoever's in our presence. But when we take the time to think through what we're mad at, how does it look different? Does what we say, do, think, and who we engage with, how does it look? How is it different? Because we take the time to think it through instead of just immediately react.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Which also makes me think of, there was a quote from Harriet Lerner on Facebook, which I thought, especially sort of in this day and age, is very useful. She says, sharing true feelings, while essential in certain circumstances, is highly overrated as a principle to live by. And she goes on to say, sometimes there's a gap between what we say and what we hope to truly accomplish in a relationship, or a gap between what we say and the sort of person we hope to become, a gap between what we say and our deeply held values, beliefs, and principles. And I thought that was so good, because sort of the feeling or emotion focused, or I gotta tell them what I really feel, where does that go, and how does that fit with relationship goals and principles?
That ties in so nicely. I had this one quote. Dr. Bowen spoke to the APA, the American Psychiatric Association, in 1972. And I think this is along the lines of that intrapsychic process of differentiation. He says, differentiation of self is making one's beliefs more consistent. I have modified all the ideas I've gotten from other people. I believe this is the way one builds a self, and it becomes uniquely you. I don't think that people have unique ideas, but they do have a unique assemblage. And I like this idea of, the intellectual system isn't just saying, this is what I believe and this is what I don't believe, but it's understanding how the beliefs became part of your being. And then I think more importantly, what are you going to do based on that belief? Differentiation of self is about action. It's not just about insight.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was thinking, I didn't want to plug this often on this podcast, but I think differentiation of self is one of those examples. For one of my takeaways would be, if people are really interested in this, I think a coach who knows Bowen theory well is really important, because I do think getting good questions about how you're working on differentiation I mean, I can just speak for myself and say it really is, it's been critical in my work in this theory. So it's one of my takeaways is I do think good questions. I mean, there's tons of resources out there where people could do their own work, but I think a coach is useful in this and being able to see outside of the system, be in contact with it, and be able to kind of stimulate the brain of the other person. Small plug for a coach.
How would you, here's my, always have to have a pop quiz, but describe the difference between a Bowen coach and, well, where am I going with this? Just sort of the emotion focused coach, which is sort of the in vogue way of doing therapy. What is the difference and what is the value in terms of a coach in Bowen theory?
I'll let you take that one first, Amie. Small question. Dixie always pops in small questions.
That's why I asked the question.
I think Dr. Bowen, as he was moving out of the psychoanalytic model, that model core to it, and most current psychotherapies and counseling, even coaching practices, views the place for healing and change in the relationship with the therapist, the coach, the counselor. And Bowen fundamentally believed that the place for change for any of us is back in our relationships with our family. And so the orientation of a coach that's working from Bowen theory isn't to use the relationship process between the client and the coach as the transformative or healing space, but that the coach is responsible to engaging the best thinking of the person they're working with so that that person can then go and practice working on that congruence between this is what I believe and this is how I'm showing up, and noticing when there are gaps in that, as Harriet Lerner points out, but then using the coaching process to kind of plan, do, review, basic executive functioning, so that they can keep staying in that relationship.
Mm-hmm. You have anything to add, Katie?
I was just going to think when I think about one of the ways that I would think about I'm doing a good job as a Bowen theory coach is if I am just continuing to ask questions to engage that brain. And, if a person isn't just coming in weekly, for their dose of building me, giving up myself to build them up and give them some self to walk out the door. But really, one thing would be they sit down in the I have a couch in my office and they say, here's what I've been working on. Here's what I've come up again. Here's what I observed in my behavior. So just thinking about how the person has taken on a project for themselves, a real action project to create something different in their world, in their system.
Well, and my takeaway was from Kathleen Smith, her book, Everything Isn't Terrible. She has sort of a basic guide for differentiation, which is observe. What do I do to manage anxiety? Evaluate. Is it helpful? Is it how I want to live? And then interrupting the automatic and manage the discomfort. And I think it speaks to the work of differentiation is done in our relationships, in our families, in those with the challenging people. Because I can be very clear-headed, not always by myself, but certainly in the presence of someone who's asking me, to be my most thoughtful self. But what does it look like to observe and live this out in our daily life? Yeah. Other takeaways or other thoughts?
We'll pick this up in the next conversation, but I was thinking differentiation of self is, it's not just going back into the relationships that are challenging, but often for me, the hardest place is to kind of claim responsibility for me and relate to others more maturely is in the easy relationships. Who wants to take a position for self when that relationship may go from smooth and harmonious to a little more crackly?
Interesting.
I hear that. I can think of one in my mind that fits that scenario. I was also just thinking as a takeaway that just something that came up in my brain as we were talking about this was not the idea of failure, that as work on differentiation isn't sort of a win-lose thing, but I think it's that journey of just thinking more about how you align to show up more consistently as the person that you want to be. So it's my last plug.
All right. Well, that's our time. I guess we have part 2 to continue thinking, but I want to thank Amie for thinking with us on this important topic today, and thanks to the audience for listening as well. And I hope that this episode has stirred ideas and your own questions as you go out into your relationships. This podcast is produced by Living Systems, a nonprofit organization in Vancouver offering counseling and training programs in Bowen family systems theory across Canada.